the reality of any brand, but especially CPG, the brand will have the same value props, but they all mean different things to different people. And so when we think about landing pages, especially top of funnel, it's really about understanding who it is you're targeting and why they should care. And so you may be focusing on different aspects of that product for different reasons, right? So, if it's coconut water, in the morning I'm working out, if I run out of my electrolyte drink, I'll run into the fridge and grab coconut water, finishing the workout, because it's just like hydration, right? Water for some reason just doesn't sit well during workouts for me. So if it's about electrolytes and kind of a healthy alternative to younger athletic people who like these brands, that's what you'll focus on. And maybe the imagery is really showing that, in use case. Then you're going to have probably parents, and then you're going to have who are thinking about alternatives for their kids instead of juice or whatever it might be. And then you're going to have kids in college. And so I think the biggest opportunity is creating those templates that can be flexible to try out different audiences, but not just try them out from a meta perspective, but try them out from actual content on these pages and how you're speaking to those audiences.
Welcome to the Marketing Factor podcast. Today I'm joined by Lucas Ballasy, the CEO and partner at Barrel, a CPG commerce agency and Shopify Plus partner. Lucas began his journey over a decade ago as a freelance designer working with innovative brands in better for you foods. Clean beauty and wellness has been his passion, helping these companies connect with customers through strategic digital experiences. Beyond his professional life, Lucas balances roles as a husband, father, and lifelong learner, whether he's training for marathons or finding new approaches to team building, all while sharing insights on leadership, creativity, and purposeful living through his weekly newsletter, Borrowed, Learned, and Thought, which I read every Sunday night right when I get it. Lucas, thanks so much for joining the Marketing Factor.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Austin. It's great.
Yeah, I love your newsletter. You and Peter from Barrel both seem to send it out at precisely the same time on Sunday.
Monday.
Not sure
Monday.
Sorry,
but
it's Monday.
All good.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Monday night.
We're working on it on Sundays, but yeah.
Working on it on Sundays. I had Peter on the podcast and loved his insights on writing. I'd love to know if he inspired you to write your own newsletter, or if that was something that you just came up with on your own.
Yeah, definitely, whether directly or not, I think writing in general, I wrote music for a long time, and I always had kind of a body of work to show for the things that I was doing. So when I was writing music, obviously it was the songs I was writing, the performances. When I was designing, I always had the work that I was doing was visual. I had it up on my website. And I think going through this period of getting into leadership and management, I moved away from really having any outlet to kind of think through these things and share what was going on. And so I started writing, but actually getting consistent really picked up during the pandemic, and definitely had a lot of conversations with Peter and had read his blog and things like that over the years. And just kind of jumped in full force. It's been 3 years now. I think this week will be 235 newsletters, something like that. But really just jumped all in. And I actually did a thing during the pandemic where I published something every day for every week, 5 days a week, just to see how long I could go and force kind of the thought and getting familiar with the idea of just letting go and putting something out there, even if it didn't feel complete. And so that's kind of the writing journey has been for me, and it's become really an outlet to think through ideas. But yeah, the question around, Peter's involvement there, definitely a lot of conversations there, and he's definitely been a mentor. We've worked together for 12 years now. So we talk about a lot of stuff, as you can imagine. And so, yeah, really enjoy the mentorship with him and the feedback over the years.
How intensive is it to write on a weekly basis? How are you coming up with ideas, and then how are you crafting the framework throughout the week and then maybe refining it?
Yeah, so it's evolved quite a bit. I think some books that were helpful to just think about this was one called Show Your Work. It's a very short, fun book that's just about kind of encouraging you to put yourself out there. And then another was Heart to Start, which is also just like, get going, like just do it. Right. And I mentioned those books because they both were kind of, integral to how I thought about this in the beginning, because the questions you ask, like what ideas, where do they come from? The idea is that you always have something that you could talk about, right? All of us, I don't care who you are. There's something going on. There's something that needs reflection. There's something that you're working on, something that you're experimenting with. And so I do have kind of a ongoing list of ideas and things that I'm just gathering, every day, things that pop in my head. I've literally, gotten back from a run. When I was training for a marathon last year, one of these long runs. Sometimes during the run, I'd stop and I'd take my phone. I'd be listening to a book and I'd record things into my Notion. Sometimes after the run, I would just like sit in my car and write the entire newsletter, and then I'd revisit it the next day and like obviously clean it up. And so those things happen. It's just really having the habit and structure of saying each week I'm going to talk about something, and it's going to force me to look at the week of events that have passed, and articulate what it is that's going on, and then force myself to like sit with those decisions. So that's why I leave it very open to like life experiences, to things that I'm trying at work, challenges that we're dealing with, and definitely some uncomfortable moments of like, I mean, Austin, you've been reading for a while. You like hit send and you're like, I don't know if I should really be sharing this information, but like, no looking back, and it's been kind of like a journal to look back on. And so a lot of this stuff for the team that we're working on, it's cool to go back to these posts and be like, hey, I wrote about this last year. Like, here's some thoughts of how we were dealing with it then. Let's look at that in comparison to right now. So
I would imagine too, like I'm a musician as well, and I do the same thing as you. I'll go for a run or something, or just a walk, and I think of something, and I'll say it into a voice memo or something, just like as a way to remember it, because I do feel like when you exercise, you're obviously getting your brain is working in a different capacity.
Yeah.
And I would do that a lot, especially as a musician too. I'd like think of a melody or some sort of like rhythmic structure and record it in voice memos, and probably have more of those than actual thoughts about, my professional career, the stuff that actually makes me money. Does, you were a musician, you were a visual designer too. Do you feel like those have helped your writing? Like those aspects have helped your professional writing and more your professional career?
Yeah, I mean, I laugh sometimes. I just met up with a friend who also was playing music, and he went much further than I did. He became like, he was signed by a publishing company, writing with some big artists. But we were both and now he's in real estate, and we were both laughing because we're like, when, I was probably like 13 when I really started going, and I was on MySpace, talking to producers in New York, sending out records to people all over the world who were buying stuff online, creating my own website. And, looking back, I was running a business. I was in my own little way. I had, marketing going, and, coordinating these shows and concerts that I would play, buying equipment to record. It wasn't like it is now. So I was buying recording equipment, figuring out how can I pay this off by selling how many CDs. And so 100%, a big part of that. And that's actually what led me into design. So doing all of that, I realized, if I'm not going to pursue music as plan A, there's this kind of design thing that I didn't know was a career, and I pursued that. And I think what design really taught me is that, it's not really about you. You're in the service industry and you're providing services to other people. And music is very much about you, right? But then it's like sharing it with other people and hearing their experiences. And so I think that was really, going to school for that and kind of learning what it looks like to get a critique, some really tough critiques, hearing from other people about your work. It's not just like whether you think it's good and what's good versus bad, right? It's all subjective. But definitely like a crash course in that through college. And then, joining Barrel as a designer, and really experiencing it with clients, and then kind of finding my way back into that kind of more, entrepreneurial side of things has been a lot of fun. So the short answer is yes, 100%. I think about it often. It's one of those things that, you don't realize is impacting you in that way at the time, but then years later you can look back, with 2020 vision and say, I think these things all stacked up to the person I am today.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very similar to you, had probably more fun just like designing the posters for the shows or the album covers that I was creating than actually rehearsing with the band itself or promoting the shows and assembling better players and to join the bands.
Sounds like we got to get something going, Austin. I know a few other people, so yeah.
Nice. I'm sure there's a lot in the agency space, but I do feel like that influenced how I it helped me kind of get that DIY style of doing things back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I feel like gives me a bit of a competitive edge on team building or kind of getting around a sense of purpose. And so it's super cool that you're able to extend that into writing and focusing, your creative output now on something that, it impacts me because I read that and I'm inspired, but I think more so it's almost for you, right? The writing aspect.
Oh yeah.
Because it gives you an outlet to work out a problem and see things through a different perspective.
And that's what's cool. I think what's always funny is the stuff that I'm most, uncomfortable hitting publish with or thinking like nobody care. Why is anyone going to care about this? It's very much about me. Is often the stuff that gets the most replies from people. And I think there's something there of just like that personal journey people connect with. And so that's kind of a cool outcome. And really the reason I started publishing this stuff was just to have the kind of deadline and just force myself to do it. But then when you put it out there, it's always cool to hear like, oh, you wrote this thing a year ago, and that somebody recently told me you wrote this thing a year ago about hiring that changed my entire approach to how I'm building my business, hiring people. And I'm like, I don't even remember what it was, So that's just really cool as kind of an external impact. And that kind of reminds me of what we both probably felt in the music space, where people come up to you and they're like, hey, like, loved listening to this song when I was going through a tough time, or, those types of things that are so cool. Cause you're like, that's just the impact that you can have as well by just sharing,
What about now as you're kind of the CEO of Barrel, which was an agency that I think Peter was telling me, started in 2006, 2007 or something like that?
Yeah. Yep. 2006. Yep.
So been around for a while, and Peter and Siwook, is that the other?
Siwook. Yep.
Siwook hit the other founders, the two founders of Barrel, basically college dorm room kind of starting or something like that, but
yeah,
and then naturally progressed, and now they've created a holding company of other agencies, and you've been enlisted as the CEO to run Barrel, but you started there as graphic design, visual designer. What was that? How did you get into? How did you even connect with them? How did you find out about Barrel?
So I came in, and I guess they were about 6 years in at that time. I've been there for 12 years. It's funny, they had just redesigned their website, and they were site of the day on awards.com. And I was working at a firm. I was doing like their graphic design and interior design firm. I love interior design. I thought it'd be a cool, way to kind of start my career, doing like digital products and stuff as well. And I just loved the site. Looked like an awesome culture. And I'll never forget running down Grand Street on lunch from my other job with I had these big portfolio box of all this print work that I had done in college, and bringing it to interview with them. And then I think they didn't have a role at the time, but then I think it took a couple months, but then, found out that they were willing to take me on as a freelancer. So I came in on 3-month contract, scared out of my mind. I didn't have insurance or anything. I'm very much like, especially at that time, like, I need all the things to be in place, like safety, which is funny because I was young. And a couple months in, maybe a month and a half in, Peter let me know that they were going to be bringing me on full time, which was awesome. My first day was actually a client meeting with Saywook, and he was like, "Don't let them know how you just started today." So I got thrown right in, which I loved. And yeah, I mean, the journey's been awesome. Big thanks to Peter and Wook for just, I never really had to think. I always had this vision of running an agency, whether it was my own or I didn't really know. My wife's also a designer. So we talked about like starting our own studio at one point, and we sort of did on the side. But I just kept showing up and just kind of putting in the work and seeing opportunities and kind of seizing them. And Peter and Wook have always just supported that and just said, "Hey, like, let's talk about this role." I've had many conversations with them of like, "Here's the title we're thinking. What do you think?" And because a lot of these roles didn't exist yet. And so, things really shifted when I became a partner and more involved in kind of overall leadership of the agency and thinking about, how we can grow and services and things like that. And then, I guess about 3 years ago, Peter approached me about moving into the CEO role in the future. We had like the date and everything and kind of what it would take to get there. And so that journey was really just kind of getting things in place. Obviously, them being the owners, there was a lot of things to kind of figure out with them stepping away. What would that look like? So we kind of had that roadmap of how to get to this point. And then, it's been a big change, but it's also been, super inspiring and a lot of fun and, learning how to, it's wild to go from being here so long and kind of feel like it's just the beginning in many ways. And kind of learning what it looks like to run the team and make certain decisions day to day. And so the past several months have really been about rethinking like our leadership structure because it's changed quite a bit, decision making, like what new roles may need to exist. But it's been energizing for sure.
That's kind of the fun part, I feel like, about the agency space, especially in the past few years. It's on one hand, it's incredibly disorienting because you're constantly have to shift leadership, titles, structure, processes because of everything that's evolving and the way that clients want to engage with an agency. But I think that gives you more room for a creative output versus just traditional kind of corporate structure, looking at, blue ocean strategy and doing things, from that. Now that stuff is super important and you have to have the fundamentals of a business down. But I feel like now more than ever, there's this opportunity, especially with what you guys have done with creating this holding company of separate agencies. I feel like that's a different and unique approach and somewhat of a risk too, to kind of go from that. So I could see that. I have had a lot of fun kind of reinventing the wheel on a seems like a daily basis for how we do things.
Yeah, change is always a big part of how we've operated. Within that, I think it's finding focus, which has been also very, interesting journey of what that means.
Yeah, I think that is the one thing that I've learned from you and other people in the space, David C. Baker, Blair Inns, other people that have been doing this for longer than Cobble Hill has been around, but to specialize and really figure out what it is that you do best and where you can serve, and really, whether it's vertically or your positioning has to be very, very strategic and focused, but also just the types of services. If you can narrow that down very specifically, then I feel like your whole world opens up for better engagements, deeper conversations, better team members. Everything just seems to compound once you start getting super focused. I know you guys had been very focused in the CPG space before, but was that deliberate because everyone loves consumer packaged goods and just wants to market stuff? Or was it just like, hey, we've done enough of these that let's focus specifically on this, and we're Shopify Plus partners, and there's all sorts of stuff that can go along with this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first accounts that I worked on when I joined Barrel was Kind Snacks. We did a lot of work with them. Still know a lot of people from those days. And, when we looked back at our portfolio, I guess it was a little over a year ago now, we were like, and I think what was the real thing was, I mean, being around for almost 20 years, our agency has changed so many times, in terms of what we do, but also like how we position ourselves. And I think what we were feeling is just like we had a tough time answering the question of like what makes us unique. And it just forced us to kind of look inwardly and say like, what do we want to be doing, and where are we focused? And so with that came, an analysis of what we've been doing and like what's been successful. And so the reason I mentioned Kind Snacks is that I think over that journey, you look back at our clients, and a lot of them were in the CPG space, and we saw a lot of challenges that they were facing, and opportunities for the future. CPG has definitely had its challenges over the past several years, and we've seen a lot of them, fail, or things just kind of, all over the place in terms of their ability to survive in the market. But we looked back, we looked at our services, and we said, hey, we see a real opportunity to bring value to these types of clients. And of course, personally, it's something I'm definitely very passionate about and excited about as well, which is always exciting. And really it came down to saying, hey, these brands are struggling with how to stand out, how to connect with their customers. Digital is changing every day. And we see a real opportunity to help them think about where their website fits into that whole story. Sometimes it's about getting into a new retailer. Sometimes it's about, having an education destination for customers. And so our strategy evolved a bit from focusing purely on e-commerce, but really thinking about commerce and the whole customer journey, and really how these things all can work together. And it's true of many brands who are omni-channel, but with CPG, it really just focuses us in kind of where we want to add value. And we had so much work to kind of show what we've been able to do in the past. And so it's been a big transition, but it hasn't been a big transition, but it's been big in the sense that the focus has been, I've never felt so focused before in our journey, where we know certain, opportunities that come up, like it's just not a good fit. And then when we market, we think about conferences, kind of everything that we're doing. If it doesn't align with our ideal client, or where they're going to be, or what they care about, it's just not worth exploring. So that's kind of how it came to be. And, it's been a lot of fun. It is a fun space. So, I was just at Expo West, and it's just a lot of fun to be talking to these brands and learning about what they're working on, and, how you can help.
One, I love how you frame it, especially for CPG, and I think for most e-commerce retailers, they do think of themselves as omni-channel these days. They kind of have to be. But for CPG brands, it certainly is important, because a lot of the stuff who's going to buy Kind bars over a box of Kind bars on the website. You're much more likely to go to Harris Teeter or wherever, and buy them there, right? So there's the storytelling aspect that needs to happen on the website in order to convey brand value, ingredients, health benefits, all of these different types of things. But as we think of things from a performance marketing aspect, a lot of times people are investing advertising, and they need to be able to attribute their ad spend towards direct purchases.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we suggest, instead of driving to the home page, for example, would drive them to a landing page. How do you guys think about landing pages when you build them out? Are you to me, it seems like there is a very specific formula for a landing page. A lot of times, if you're driving to let's say you're uh, you have a coconut water brand or something, and you want to get people to buy online. They've got great reviews, things like this, great imagery. There's some sort of electrolyte benefit that's different than everything else. How do you think about kind of positioning a landing page? And the reason I say landing page is because I think that like the the time that people have is so finite now that they need to get that information so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, the beautiful thing about how marketing exists today is the ability to understand who you're targeting and who is actually interacting with your ads, content, whatever it might be. And so while we don't do the media buying and building out that strategy, we really try to, if we're working on landing pages, get as close as possible to the marketing team to understand what's happening there, what are they learning. And this is actually a gap we see quite a bit with these brands, some that are spending a lot of money on marketing without answers to these questions. But I think what the reality of any brand, but especially CPG, is you have, especially in the better for you kind of segment of that space, these products all have different, they all have the same, the brand will have the same value props, but they all mean different things to different people. And so when we think about landing pages, especially top of funnel, it's really about understanding who it is you're targeting and why they should care. And so you may be focusing on different aspects of that product for different reasons, right? So, if it's a coconut water, I know when I run out in the morning, I'm working out. If I run out of my electrolyte drink, I'll run into the fridge and grab coconut water, finishing the workout, because it's just like hydration, right? Water for some reason just doesn't sit well during workouts for me. So if it's about electrolytes and kind of a healthy alternative, whatever it is, to younger athletic people who like these brands, that's what you'll focus on. And maybe the imagery is really showing that in use case. Then you're going to have probably parents, and then you're going to have who are thinking about alternatives for their kids instead of juice or whatever it might be. And then you're going to have kids in college. And so I think the biggest opportunity is creating those templates that can be flexible to try out different audiences, but not just try them out from a meta perspective, but try them out from actual content on these pages and how you're speaking to those audiences. And then as you get lower funnel, if you're going to, if you're trying to drive D2C, going to product pages, that sort of thing. But then we also have clients where we're really just trying to get them to sign up for the email list, so that we can send coupons as a follow-up that are local to them, or we're sending them to a coupon page, other ways that are actually driving them into the retail store. And there's some cool partners that are emerging that, on the store locator side, that have different ways of attributing sales to those ads, through into retail. Coupons is obviously the easiest way because you can, could track it. But those are the conversations we're having with clients in terms of what is that full customer journey? What do we want them to do in the end? We do see a big opportunity on the email side because I think the biggest challenge right now is I see in CPG is even if brands are growing very rapidly in retail and the business is scaling, they lose a sense of who their customer is, and they have really no relationship with those people. I say all the time on these calls, I'm sure there's plenty of products that you buy every week, every month, that you've never gone to the brand's website. And then if you switch, they'll never know that you existed, right? And so we're thinking about how do we capture those people and then drive the behavior into the store. So if you're launching a new product, something for the fall or the winter, whatever, seasonal things, you're driving customers into the store to buy, and you can ask them questions about their product, about your products, and get feedback and try things out online that you couldn't do in store rapidly. And so those are things that we're all really interested in. I know I'm veering off from landing pages, but I think there's much more to kind of what it means to put up a landing page within the overall kind of customer journey and strategy for the brand.
When we stopped, we did a lot of we were Shopify Plus we are still Shopify Plus partners, but when we were building websites, we were working on a lot of Shopify Plus sites. And when we stopped and just focused on performance marketing, and this was around 2020 during the start of the pandemic, headless was kind of this huge thing at the time. I'm wondering why that headless, why did that become such a hot topic, and why did it fall out of fashion so quickly?
Yeah, I think from my perspective and what I've seen is the story around headless at that time was all about speed, performance, flexibility with design and content that you couldn't get within Shopify, which was mostly true at the time. However, what a lot of people weren't talking about is some of the downsides of headless in terms of the ecosystem that you get within Shopify is much more challenging to integrate when you have a headless site because you're not using the native Shopify backend functionality. And so every kind of integration is a bigger project. And then what we've seen is just challenges with like Google Analytics tracking, like all kinds of other tracking issues that just need that extra layer of support to on a headless site. And then people will argue this, but that does result in like a higher cost of ownership to manage a site like that. And so I think the benefits though during that period were, what I just said, and which is why you saw brands jumping into that space. Today, there are some reasons, mostly around different integrations and things that you might be trying to do that get very technical that make headless a worthwhile thing to move toward. For us, it's something we rarely see these days. And I think what has happened is Shopify really started investing in solving a lot of those challenges with Shopify native. And so Shopify 2.0 came out with drag and drop modules and just a lot more flexibility in the back end of how a design can be used. And so we've seen and have worked on, even for our own clients, several like Shopify 2.0 upgrade projects, as well as like consolidating off of headless. So we've probably done like 3 of those in the last year or so. So yeah, I think ultimately like it's just getting back to what Shopify offers and why it's been so successful is a lot of the kind of easy functionality that you get when you're all just in Shopify. Keeping that available to you is important. And then there's other ways to kind of tackle things like site speed. If it's really that bad and you have a lot of integrations, like there's other ways to kind of get around that. So, there's no arguing with what headless offers. It's just that it also can bring a lot more complexity that isn't necessarily worth it in the end. Things that are definitely solvable in a much more efficient way outside of that.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, the cost of ownership of a website, as you mentioned, can definitely compound pretty quickly when you're adding a lot of different integrations and different, technical aspects. When do you think that a brand is mature enough to not just utilize a Shopify out of the box theme that, from my eyes, seems almost better sometimes than a custom website that you could get yourself? Granted, you have great assets, great content already. Someone who can at least navigate that, a brand designer who can go in the back end and customize that. When does it make sense to actually have a true custom theme? Like, at what point does a brand reach that level?
It's a great question because I think it actually is. So there's a few ways to have this conversation quite a bit. I'm just organizing my thoughts on how to describe it. So ultimately, there's like the very clear way of saying, does the amount of revenue, and depending on how the business is looking at it, could be total revenue, could be D2C revenue, meaning if they see value in the website for many other channels, which we hope, or if they're like, hey, we're only doing $500,000 on our D2C site. which some of the biggest brands are only doing $500,000 on their D2C site, right? So it just depends on how you're thinking about your investment. But sometimes it's just really easy to see that it's just not worth it to spend more than $50K or something on the site. And so I always try to get that in the beginning of our conversations to just understand, like, where is the budget constraints and how are you thinking about it? Because that's going to inform our approach. But then I think outside of that, it really comes down to a couple things. One, which I don't think is talked about often, but is the level of process and milestones that the client is looking for. Because if you're going deeper into like strategy, UX, design exploration, it's going to be harder to use an out of the box theme because you only have you're going to end up like really changing so much that it just isn't worth starting with a theme. And so the deeper we see the need or the desire from the client to do some of the like design exploration, multiple directions, do like serious wireframing, that's where we start to get away from being able to just get a theme out of the box. And then I would say sometimes we know that that's necessary. Like, we're just looking at the business and what they're selling, and there's a lot to it that's complex. It's not just buying products. There's millions of variants. Like, there's a deep catalog. We might just be like, hey, it's just not like, we're going to need to kind of build a lot of custom things that are going to really work. Custom being like, they're not going to be all out of the box from what Shopify offers. But all of this to say, even as an agency who does this every day, we agree. Like, there are some really great themes out there, and almost every conversation, we're having the conversation around the viability of a theme. Even as a starting point, like, I'm talking to a brand right now who's turning D2C back on. They're in the CPG space. They have a product that is shelf stable that they can ship really easily. They didn't prior. So they're like, yeah, we see a huge opportunity here. They have some PR coming up, and they need a site in like 8 weeks. So I was like, here's how we do it with theme. And so we talked through that, and they understand the constraints, but the good news is, like, they're going to get a great end product. We're still going to do some customization on it. But then you can build upon it. And that, I think, is the key, is like, you can still add things in the future. It's not something that you're locked in forever. And so that's kind of how we talk through it. And Shopify has definitely caught up. The theme developers have caught up, where themes are a great option today compared to where they were several years ago. So
yeah, I love that. And I think that's I think that's the most sound advice you can give for established brands that are doing tens, 100 million a year already. That's fine. But these startups that need something, the traditional way of the 3-month website build, to me, seems like almost not where I would want it to, where I ever suggest to spend their money to start. It's, hey, let's start with something that's tested, a theme, and we can iterate on that eventually. But let's get learnings, and then we can continue to make modifications and build upon that. That being said, when we were building websites, the whole thing was waterfall method of building websites, wireframe, content strategy, wireframe, design, then development. And then this approach to sprints came out, which is more of a software style of developing. But it seemed like some agencies were embracing that. Some were still sticking on the waterfall. How has that evolved in, what is Barrel doing now, and what are you seeing other agencies doing to help their clients? Because I would expect clients' expectations now to be something much quicker, because you can just generally create something in AI now in 10 minutes.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for us, like what there's of course like the dev the technical know-how and the creative prowess and things like that we're getting hired for from clients, but they're also really thinking about how the strategy, the insights, the kind of know-how when it comes to using the Shopify ecosystem or understanding like how these channels work together, like integrations that exist, right? And so I say that because, from a process standpoint, we start with a lot of that strategy of laying the groundwork, and we even do as much as we can in the new business in phases as well. But then really depending on what the project is going to dictate like how sprint like it is versus and waterfall to a degree, but it's funny answering that is making me think about how things have evolved over the years. I would say when things are faster, we lean on like a very tight sprint schedule because it's like right out of the gate. It's even in the SOW because we know we only have so much time and we have to have this really tight plan. And that plan, we have one or two that fit a certain use case that we can start with and kind of modify for that situation. Otherwise, like just if we're talking like full website builds, we do have larger phases, but what we've started to do over the last couple of years is looking for clients to actually get into the Shopify site earlier. What we found is that when you really treat it as a waterfall approach and you're waiting for certain things to get to a certain level of being final, you still run the risk of the client not understanding how complex it may be for them to upload content. Like if they're coming from Magento, WooCommerce, or they're coming from nothing, this can be a lot. And so we've started to really change our process around moving certain steps much earlier than we would normally have, which is less waterfall in the sense that like things are done before you can do X, Y and Z. It's more like, hey, we're working on this, but we've got this stuff like prototyped. Why don't you come start working on this while we're doing this? And so that's been really helpful because it's allowed clients to have a longer runway ahead of launch to understand like what they need to understand, before we get to that point where it's like everybody's got to be all hands on deck. And then of course we have a lot of retainer engagements, which are very different. Some that are like CRO focused, so we're testing every month. Some that are more about kind of monthly tasks that we're working on with the client. And those are just by nature super iterative and are sprint based, because it's not about, it's a bunch of little projects versus kind of one big project with a clear start and end.
Yeah, I implore you guys to define like you guys should copyright whatever your methodology is, because what always pissed me off about the waterfall method is because it did it, in my opinion, things can work asynchronously, no matter how it is. If it's designed, it can still work asynchronously. You obviously have to have certain functions, but I find sometimes, hey, we have to wait for content before we can design anything. It's like, well, I think we kind of know the general wireframe
Certainly
now of what an e-commerce website looks like.
Yes. Yeah, they all have to be, you got to have the right things in the right place, or people are just not going to know what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, process is super important, but I love the meme. You can just do things. I don't know if you ever like see that on like
I think
like
so,
on Twitter. It's like you can just do things. It's like it's just like, to me now, like there's so much information at your fingertips that you can be, and kind of what an e-commerce site looks like now. We know what an ad should feel like, and know, like we have the wireframe just embedded in our mind now. You can just do things, like I feel like there's more room for asynchronous type work nowadays more than ever, which is awesome.
Yeah, totally agree.
What are like the trends that you're seeing in e-commerce that are happening now that are especially in CPG that that are something that is maybe surprising that you're kind of
Surprising. Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, this isn't surprising, but we all know just with some of the updates a while back with Facebook and Meta, it's just been harder and more unclear of how to acquire customers. And so I think we went through this phase and still see it happening in just retention and understanding how do we grow the customers that we have and keep them in the door, which I think is a great transition. And so for us, that's been about like doing more customer interviews for our clients who really understand, they want to understand like, why do customers love us? Why do they keep coming back? And then thinking about things like, which we're seeing a ton of, like loyalty programs, memberships are becoming, like in the running community, especially, there's memberships everywhere, and kind of understanding like, what does it mean to be a member? And can it actually be, something kind of like the old REI model of this membership that's really just like giving you some extra benefits that aren't really much for the brand to offer. But these are all just ways to kind of create a connection with the customer in a way that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so within CPG, that's actually something that is a conversation we're having a lot, because if D2C isn't the primary channel, what other ways can you attract the customer and get them kind of brought into your brand and build loyalty with them? And those are often offering, content, memberships, loyalty programs, like other ways, free gifts, exclusive launches, things like that, that make the kind of e-commerce channel more interesting. But again, it's not, in those cases, it's not actually about the sales, which is like a mindset shift. Like all of these brands want to see sales increasing on that channel, but they're more like, how do we how do we build brand loyalty with this customer base and then continue to drive them back into store, right? Or on Amazon or wherever the other places are that they're growing in a much more rapid pace. So we see that a lot. I think just in e-commerce in general, retention is still a big focus, and really thinking about, things like the email side of things, and just like you wouldn't believe how many brands we talk to who like don't have segments in their email list, don't have automations in place. And so we still see that often as a big opportunity to really understand, the right way to stay connected with customers there. And then a big part of, AI is definitely, not a trend that no one's talking about, but just in the e-commerce world, I think there's a lot of conversation just around how to leverage it in a smart way and where it really has impact. And so that could be around cross-selling and personalization. That might be about, which I think we're going to continue to see the rise of like AI agents, who are really navigating you through the product catalog and making recommendations in more of a conversational way than actually just navigating, the site. And then even some really interesting things of just like product photography and creative assets using some of these AI tools. I'm not talking about like fully AI, but I've seen some really interesting ones, like Tolstoy just launched, where you can upload one photo of a model wearing a piece of clothing, and then they'll create kind of like a mini video of that model as if they were kind of moving around. And so I think that's just the way I would frame it, is just more that these brands know it exists. They know it can be helpful. They're looking for ways to be more efficient and more impactful. And so kind of finding the right solutions there for them has just become really important.
One thing I saw that was pretty cool and different was it was a big retailer. I'm not sure if it was Best Buy or Home Depot or something, but they had completely abandoned just their navigation, and they just had a search box at the top. Nothing, no navigation. I mean, maybe there was a navigation somewhere that someone could access, but the first thing you saw, instead of a hamburger, we're talking mobile here, instead of a hamburger, was search. And you just type in, and I think that people are leaning more into that. I think you'll see more elements of, chat GPT type agents like you're talking about coming onto the site, where you can just start having a conversation that way. Hey, I'm on Foot Locker's website or whatever, and I'm looking for a specific type of shoe. I'm a size 10, whatever, like give me what I want. And then it kind of takes you there. I feel like that's kind of the evolution of how AI maybe integrates more onto a website in the future from a chat perspective.
It's funny, just in a small way, like we're working with a client in beauty right now, and we're doing a lot of CRO work, and we found that the conversion rate of customers who use search was like 5% higher.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
Than those who didn't, which is fascinating. And so it's really like, what does that mean, right? And how do we get people to use search? But it means that if they are looking for something and they find it, then they're more likely to check out, right? So anyway, just interesting insights there to kind of think about really understanding what people are getting comfortable with and used to, and how that's going to impact what we're doing every day.
Yeah, more high intent there. I mean, we obviously, when we run performance ads, we see, higher performance for Google ads when people, shopping Google ads than we do from a Facebook ad, obviously, because it's like someone's in the market for sneakers. They're going to type that into the search box on Google. Now, I think that'll go away eventually with the advent of AI. People will start using more of that and getting specific there.
It's funny. We're like on the SEO side. Yeah. We're optimizing for how to get our clients to show up in that AI response. Yep. Now it's a whole different world. And I think reminding ourselves that we're the customers who are using half these things all the time. So it's like, it's what's so interesting about what we do, because sometimes you lose sight of the fact that you're a customer, you're on the website, you're doing these things. So it's like, what is my behavior every day?
For sure.
And is what we're creating something that I would actually use, or is natural for me?
Yeah. Generative engine optimization, GEO. That's what they're calling that now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Dude, Lucas, it's been awesome having you on. Where can people, if they want to learn more about you or Barrel, where can they find out more?
Yeah, so our website, barrelny.com, and then my website is lucasballasy.com, and you'll see all of my writing on there, newsletter, and then I'm super active on LinkedIn, so you can find me on there as well.
Yep, every time I log on to LinkedIn, I see a post by either you or Peter. It's got exponentially more than I do. Last little story, my old boss, this guy Jason Mitchell, he has this social media agency. He had a post that got like 14,000 likes on LinkedIn or something. And I was like, dude, how did that happen? And he was like, I have no idea. I mean, he posts a lot, but I was like,
yeah, that's the thing. You don't.
Yeah.
That's cool, a whole other podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks, Lucas.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Austin. Thanks.